he is, Maddox whispered. Keep still. There had been a movement up on the ridge of the mountain. For a moment, something had appeared between two rock outcrops. I didn't see any horns, Ben said. Keep quiet, Maddox whispered fiercely. Ben crouched behind a boulder and watched this man get into position on his stomach, his legs apart, the heavy rifle resting on a small flat stone. Maddox slowly lowered his face to the cheek piece and eased his hand down to the trigger. Now he lay motionless, looking through the long, flattened telescope sight. Ben had never known bighorn sheep to behave this way. There had been 5 of them on the ridge, but something had alarmed them, and they had disappeared. By now, they should be half a mile from here and still going. I'd wait until I saw some horns, Ben whispered. Without raising his cheek from the stock, Maddox said, I saw horns. I didn't. You weren't looking. I was looking, not through a 10-power scope. Ben stayed crouched, hanging his weight on the sling of his little .22 Hornet. The range was at least 300 yards, but this man Maddox was dangerous with a gun. On the way into the desert, Maddox had shot at anything that moved, and some things, like a Gila monster, lying peacefully in the shade that did not move. And Maddox did not miss. The gun was a beautifully made .358 Magnum, action on a Winchester 70 stock with enough power to knock down an elephant or turn a sleeping Gila monster into splatter. A bighorn hit with that gun would drop where he stood. Ben hoped that whatever it was up there would not show itself again. Maddox huddled over the gun. There was an intensity in his eyes far beyond that of just hunting a sheep. It was the look of murder. There weren't many bighorn left in the world, and Ben couldn't understand why anyone would want to kill one. And yet for the past 3 days, that was all this Maddox had thought about. Killing a bighorn and having the head mounted to hang on the wall of his office in Los Angeles. Ben, my young friend, you're not the type of man who can understand big game hunting, Maddox told him the first night in the desert. Ben had looked at Maddox's face in the firelight, the skin seeming even cold in the warm, soft glow. The only hunting I understand is when it's the only way you can get something to eat, Ben had said. Since we don't need one for camp meat, shooting a bighorn doesn't sound like a big deal to me. That had really teed Maddox off. You may not know it, but the chances of getting a permit to kill a bighorn are about 1 in a million. I've been waiting for years, hoping my name would be drawn from among the thousands of guys putting in for one. When you come out into the desert and risk your life stalking one of the smartest and wariest animals in the world, and you outsmart him and take him on his own ground, you've accomplished something. That's something you'll never understand. Maddox had irritated Ben from the start, and he was sorry now that he had agreed to come out here with him. Although he needed the money Maddox was going to pay him, it meant a semester in college, maybe 2. We can go back to town tonight, Ben told him, and you can get a guide who thinks the way you do. A local yokel hotshot I don't need, Maddox had said. All I want is somebody to show me where the bighorn are, and they said in town you knew as much about their range as anybody. If this is a big competition between you and the sheep, Ben had said, wouldn't you feel a lot better doing it by yourself? Look, my permit only gives me 7 days to kill a bighorn, and I could spend all 7 of them roaming around out here and not even find one. You know where they range, and I'm paying you to take me there. From then on, it's just me and them, and I don't need some sand dune expert telling me what to do. Ben looked at Maddox sprawled on the ground. For 3 days and 2 nights, Ben had been in the desert with this man, and the only time he had ever laughed was after he told some story about how smart he was. Maddox never lost a business deal, according to Maddox, and in every deal somebody got hurt. It wasn't enough for Maddox to outwit somebody, outdeal a man in some tricky way. The guy had to get really hurt, too. Listening to Maddox made Ben glad he wasn't in the same world as this man. In Ben's town, on the edge of the desert, there wasn't anything for a man like Maddox to wheel and deal for. And Ben thought, even after I'm a geologist and working for a big oil company, I still won't be in the same world as men like Maddox. Ben looked down at his Jeep on the flat desert far below them. The heat around it made it seem as though it were underwater, the shape of it wavering and indistinct. 4 more days with this man. Ben was getting paid for every one of them. Ben relaxed and listened to the silence. The heat seemed to have killed every sound. It was as though he were in an enormous bowl of silence, as though from the purple mountains 60 miles east to the brown mountains 40 miles west, all sound had been silenced by the intense still heat. Even a plane from Edwards Air Force Base, the plane itself invisible, moved in silence, leaving 2 thin white lines across the hot blue sky. The sound of the gun was absolutely enormous. It was as though it had shattered the ground and cracked the blue vault of the sky and rolled the mountains back. The thing roared and echoed and lunged into the silence and seemed to roll on, mile after mile, never to stop. And then, just as suddenly, there was the dead silence again. Maddox's voice sounded small and flat after the great roar of the gun. He didn't even seem interested in what he was saying. Well, I got him. He was still lying prone as he worked the bolt, the brass empty, flicking out and sailing end over end, then tinkling down among the stones at Ben's feet. He reached down and picked it up, tossing it from hand to hand, for it was still hot from the explosion and the desert. Maddox rose slowly and pulled the rifle up by the sling. He took the lens caps out of his pocket and carefully fitted them on the ends of the scope. Your uncle tells me you're working to get money to go to college, Maddox said. That's right, Ben said, wondering why Maddox suddenly wanted to chat. Maddox dropped the clip out of the gun and slowly replaced the cartridge. You want to make a deal? He asked. Ben watched him shove the clip back in and hit it with the flat of his hand. Maddox looked up. Well? What sort of deal? Money, Maddox said. For school. You see, Ben, this is the only chance I'll ever get for a bighorn. They'll never pull my name out of that hat again. Not in a million years. So naturally, I want a good specimen. A ram with a really good rack I can be proud of. You said you saw horns. I did, but not for long enough to tell whether a tip had been broken off or they were all chipped up from fighting. You never can tell until you've really examined them, you know. What's the deal? It really doesn't even involve you, Maddox told him. But I'm giving up a week of my time and going to a lot of expense to get a good specimen. That's all I want. So let's go take a look at what I killed. But if it isn't a good specimen, Maddox stood looking at him, smiling now. Ben thought of the bighorn. He usually saw them when the sun was low and the hard blue of the sky was fading into broad bands of soft colors, and the mountains were turning purple. They would stand on the ridges then, probably looking a lot bigger than they really were. Just standing there against the sky, looking as though they owned the desert, the huge curved horns beautifully balanced. He had a feeling that when he and Maddox got to the top of the ridge, that sheep, with a .358 Magnum through it was going to look small and forlorn, pitiful. A bloody thing lying among the hot stones, the big horns twisting its neck into some awkward position. If it's not the specimen you want, I don't report anything, and we just go on hunting for 4 more days. Is that it? Ben asked. It's not up to you to report anything anyway, is it? Maddox asked. I'm the hunter here, right? Right, Ben said. But I don't want any part of you going around shooting every bighorn into the desert until you get the specimen you want. Maddox laughed. Ben, now you know as well as I do that I probably won't even get another shot at one. So don't be a Boy Scout. If this isn't a good specimen, how about for double the money and a $100 bonus, we keep on hunting. If we don't find anything, we'll come back and pick up this one. And you still get the extra money, okay? Ben remembered Maddox's stories about the deals he made. Somebody always got cheated and hurt. But there were mountains where the bighorn never went. Mountains that looked exactly like these. Maddox could spend the rest of his life looking for bighorn in those ranges and never find one. Okay, Ben said. After all, I'm not asking you to do anything illegal, Ben. I'm just paying you some nice money to drive me around. There's nothing wrong with that. Not a thing, Ben said. Then it's a deal, Maddox said, slinging the gun over his shoulder. Ben watched him start up the ridge, his feet on the stones making a lot of noise in the silence of the place. Ben knew now that whatever was lying there on the ridge wasn't going to be good enough for Maddox. It could be the biggest ram in the mountains, but it wouldn't be good enough. Ben looked around, picking out landmarks so he could find this place again. As far as he was concerned, Maddox had seen the last bighorn he was going to see, and whatever he had killed up there was going to be all he killed. Maddox was well ahead of him as he started climbing, the heat blasting down on him as though it had real weight. Ben had reached a little area of shale, the flat rocks sliding under his boots, when Maddox got to the top and disappeared behind the boulder, so that only the muzzle of the .358 could be seen moving along. A patch of pale brown showed it lying in a crack of the cliff face, and Ben looked down at where they had been. He had to admit that Maddox had done a good job of shooting. He was not surprised to see Maddox coming back in such a hurry that he almost fell. Ben waited for him, wondering what he was going to say about the sheep he'd killed. That the horns weren't big enough, or were chipped. Okay, Ben thought, 4 more days of you, but you've seen your last bighorn. What do you know? Maddox said, not even stopping as he went down the mountain. I missed him. I thought I had him cold, but I missed him. Ben looked at the man in disgust. He must have killed a ewe or a young ram with no rack at all, and now he didn't want to admit it. You didn't miss him, Ben said. He's lying right there in the crack in that cliff. No, Maddox said over his shoulder as he kept on going down. I thought that was a sheep too, but it's only a rock. I missed. Must have jarred the scope climbing up here, or this heat got to it, because ordinarily I don't miss a shot like that. Let's go. Let's go see if we can find that herd again. At last, Maddox stopped and turned around. You still got your deal, if that's what's worrying you. That's not what's worrying me, Ben said. So let's go. If we can get around these mountains before sunset, we might see him again. Ben looked up at what he had thought was a dead sheep. What difference did it make to him if Maddox was a liar? I'm not paying you to stand around, Maddox snapped. I'm paying you to hunt bighorn, so move it. The thing that interests me, Ben said quietly, is that rocks don't bleed much. He pointed with his thumb at the pale stone of the cliff. From the bottom of the V, where the stone had cracked, a trickle of blood, very dark red in the hot sunlight, ran slowly, the heat congealing it on the stone face. Maddox, his head down, walked slowly back up to where Ben was standing. Then he lifted his eyes and grinned. I'm a liar, Ben. I didn't miss that shot. Remember you told me to look for horns and I said I'd seen them? I was lying then too. I shot a little female. I just didn't want to tell you because I was afraid you'd call off the hunt. You understand that, don't you, Ben? Ben shrugged. Okay, I'll bury it. Why bother? Because the game warden will spot her from his chopper and know who killed her is one reason. You want some more? You can't see her from the air. I had a hard time finding her. I was right on top of her before I saw her. You're not a game warden, Ben said as he kept on climbing. Ben, Maddox said. Ben kept moving. Ben! Ben glanced back at him. We'll lose the rest of the day, Maddox said. I'd rather take my chances with the game warden than lose the whole day just burying a dead sheep. Come on, buddy, let's get going. The trouble with Maddox is, Ben thought, he's always right. There really wasn't much point in lugging that dead weight down the mountain to bury it in the sand. Here the vultures would be at it by dawn. By nightfall, the coyotes would be there, and soon there would be nothing left but a few scattered bones, which the rodents would in time destroy. And what difference does it make to me, Ben thought, if the game and fish department gets all over this guy? He looked up once more at the blood, now dried on the stone. He was closer to the broken stones of the cliff now, and his angle of vision was different, so that he saw further into the fissure of the stone. A white-haired man was looking back at him. His eyes were faded, skim-milk blue, and were wide open. His mouth was open too, and from it a trail of blood went down his cheek and onto the rock.